Build Your Business listeners. This is Matt Reynolds, your host for the podcast, and you are listening to what we are calling the legacy episodes. And really, these are the pre-episodes that really led to this podcast, the Build Your Business podcast. This is really my life's work and my brother's life's work in building your business. And so they were originally published in the Barbell Logic podcast as part of the Principles or Coaching Success series, but really touch on similar topics to the Build Your Business podcast: how to improve your productivity, how to set and accomplish your goals, deprioritize urgent tasks, to focus on what is most important to you, and most importantly, to become a better person and leader and business owner overall. I'm proud to bring you these podcasts. Again, many years of life's work, several years of podcasts, and several decades of business ownership. Hope you enjoy them and learn from them. You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show. You're listening to the Barbell Logic podcast. I'm your host, Matt Reynolds. This is another episode of the Coaching Success series. Happy Friday, everybody. I hope you have a great weekend this weekend, and we'll dive right in as we usually do. I've been thinking a lot about thinking, about the importance of thinking. And I really kind of wish occasionally post writing the book, I think about things that I wish I had included at least a paragraph or two. And this is one of those things that's really not addressed in the book, but I have thought about, we've talked about as mission control, Andrew and Nikki especially, Nikki's big on this, is just taking time out to think, to just clear your mind and think about the things that matter. And I want to talk about how I do that and give you some in the trenches kind of tactical ways that I do that and how I do that and prepare myself to be able to do that. And so, we live in a life, in a world, in a culture that is so just drenched in urgency that we often can't do the important things. That's the point of the book. One of those really important things I've found is that I need to be able to take time every week to just clear my head and think. And that's often about the business, but sometimes it's about family. There's always things that are important that require, in order to get to the important work, that require some thought without kind of the pressure of urgency coming down on your shoulders. And so I think thinking is one of those things. One of the things that I'll do when I want to think about a thing, so there's a project coming up or there's an important thing in the future, or I'm thinking about relationships in my family or how to lead my kids, and I just need to work through those in my own head. And there's a previous episode, I don't know, a couple months ago, about how I sort of distill that information in my own brain. And so you can go back and listen to that. But one of the things I thought about is, when do I think best? When is my brain most clear so that I can think about the things that really matter, whether that's strategy for the business, the direction that we're going, the relationships and the way I want to lead my kids, or how to cultivate the relationship with my wife, or whatever those things are. And one of the things that I've learned in studying this is that if you study the great thinkers, people like Einstein and tons of, like, all the way back to Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, they were big fans of thinking while walking. And so I want to get there, and I'll talk about how I do that. But even before that, how do you set yourself up to be in a position to think? Maybe you're not like me. If I have something urgent hanging over my shoulders, and I even think back, I often equate back to remembering being in both undergrad and graduate school. If I had papers due or projects due, I had a hard time focusing on anything else until that thing was done. And so that's an urgent thing, and they were often important, and they had a deadline, and they were due on Friday, and those sorts of things. What I've noticed as I've gotten older, in my mid-40s, is that my best thinking occurs, one, after good sleep. So when I've had good sleep, and I track my sleep every night, you guys know I'm not affiliated at all. I have Apple products, Apple Watch, Apple phone, things like that. We use a app called Auto Sleep. I think it's like $5 one time. Everything tracks your sleep. This is the best one I've found. And I actually use multiple ones. I've had the Oura Ring. I've got the 8 Sleep, which I love. The iPhone does that. I'm sure Androids do that as well. And they look at kind of like, motion and breathing patterns and heart rate, resting heart rate, things like that. But when I get good sleep, and so like last night, I slept 7 hours, which for me is good. I recognize that Huberman and other people would say it's not enough, but I got about 4 hours of deep sleep. So the quality of sleep that I got, especially the ratio of quality sleep I got for the total sleep, was fantastic. And so today's a good day to think. And so after good sleep, but not too soon. So I think a lot of people think, and maybe I've even given the impression that I wake up at, 3:00 in the morning, 3:30, whatever, and I'm like, bing, and I'm awake and I'm firing on all cylinders. I'm not. I'm still groggy like everybody else is. And I kind of, put in the contacts, go to the bathroom, walk downstairs, take the dog out, make a cup of coffee. It takes me probably half an hour to really wake up post sleep or even post nap. I've noticed that another great time for me to think is napping. And I didn't used to nap. My wife has always been a napper, but over the last 3-4 months, moving my wake up time from on average, 4:30 in the morning to like 3 in the morning has reduced my amount of total sleep at night. And I'm taking naps almost every day. In the afternoon, it's almost exactly an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. It's rarely longer than an hour. And I can just be exhausted, and I'm physically exhausted and mentally, emotionally exhausted. I can take a nap. I wake up, takes me again, probably from a nap, 15 minutes or so to come out of the grogginess. And it's a great time to just think about things and be creative. And so this creative thinking, this kind of brainstorming in your own head, and it's just it's just you. I'm not doing this and having conversations. And again, if you go back to Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle, they would often teach while walking. And that made sense because they didn't have cars, and they would kind of walk around and, probably go walk somewhere to get something to eat. And while they're walking, they're talking. And there is something that occurs there with the blood flow from walking that works great. And so after good sleep, number one. Number two, after my very urgent work is cleared. So the first thing I do, and a lot of my urgent work doesn't take a ton of highly processed thought. And so I get up in the morning, I online coach. I've online coached for decades. And so online coaching is not difficult thought process for me. I've watched millions of videos. I can break down squats. I can talk to people. It also, like, just the process of talking sort of gets the brain juices flowing and words coming out of my mouth. And I'm not just sitting there drinking coffee in a groggy state. And so that's another important thing that I do, is I have to have the urgency cleared. If I go and try to go on a walk and think about the things that are really important and what the strategy and the plan is for how to approach those, and I have this cloud of urgency hanging over my head, I can't do it. And then, as I've mentioned, walks are fantastic. I go on a ton of walks around the neighborhood. I do those with my wife. When I do them with my wife, we often talk about the day, the family. We're doing wisdom sessions with my 19-year-old daughter and her serious boyfriend every week about what the topic is going to be and the kind of approach to that topic. We're not doing premarital counseling. I don't think that's probably appropriate for a parent to do. They need to find another great couple to do that with. But just like the wisdom, the stuff that I am the son of the boomer generation. I'm not saying every boomer is like this, but they just sort of held stuff in. My parents never taught us about, how to be affectionate towards my wife or how to manage finances or debt. They modeled it really well. They had while we were extremely poor, my upbringing was fantastic in that my parents loved each other. They loved us. They modeled it well. They were hard workers. They modeled those things, but they never really taught those things. And so I was actually watching a documentary the other day that people who had kind of great families and, a handful of children, lots of grandchildren, and all of them were focused citizens and they were doing the right thing, like, pretty much across the board. Like there might be a wayward one here and there. And they said the teaching or the passing down the wisdom is like 70% modeling and 30% teaching. And my parents modeled it really well. They crushed it, but they didn't teach it much. We never really sat down and talked about, like, here's how you do a budget. And of course, today we've got things like YNAB and and all sorts of technology that we can use for good that we often use for cat videos and TikTok and pornography. And so we do have a leg up if we can control those desires. But when I walk, either with my wife, where we often talk about family issues and what we need to talk about and go through and give wisdom and teach wisdom and model wisdom to our children and to our community and whatever that is, or if I'm by myself, which I really enjoy, walks by myself, or even riding my bike by myself, things that don't take much thought, I'm able to really think through things. I sort of hate taking my phone. I usually do because I'm such a list maker on my phone. There may be a better way for you to do that. When I start thinking about things, if I have to hold those ideas in my head, it takes up bandwidth. And then I just think about a third of the way through the walk or halfway through the walk. Don't forget this thing. Don't forget this thing. So I use almost like a Pomodoro technique where very quickly I'll make bullet points on my phone. I'll mostly keep my phone in my pocket. And as an idea comes to me, I'll just jot something down that will remind me, like, this is the idea you were thinking about. And I take those walks. And those walks, while I often use walks for exercise, walks for thinking are not super focused. I'm not really looking at my heart rate. I'm not trying to get a certain number of mileage in. I'm just sort of sauntering. And I still tend to walk relatively quickly because I do want some exercise benefit. But the primary benefit is the thinking it allows me to do. So walk around the neighborhood. This past week has been very cool early mornings, like in the low 60s, which is just tremendous for walking. And so I walk and think. And I jot a few notes down and walk and think and jot a few more notes down, and not detailed notes, just bullet points. Then I come back and I distill those or flesh those out even. And that allows me to then address the important things that need to be addressed. So walks are a great time. And again, tons of people, if you study like who walked to think, like there's just a massive list of famous thinkers, philosophers, theologians, scientists, etc. The other places that I think about is when I'm doing things that don't require thought or much thought, those are other great times to think. And so for me, I think a lot in the sauna. So I've got a sauna, I sit in a sauna. I realize most of you don't have a sauna, but those are great times. Something like that, where I'm just sitting there for 10, 15, 20 minutes sweating. It often makes the time go by faster if I get to think about something. So I actually take my phone in the sauna. I put it on the floor of the sauna where it's less hot so it doesn't overheat. And so far, so good. And when I think about a thing, I'll pick it up from the floor, sweaty and all. Usually bring a little washcloth in, make sure I'm not dripping all over the phone, and I'll jot the notes down and I'll put the phone right back on the floor so it doesn't overheat. And it's a great time, right? Driving is a great time. So I'm going to go out to today. Actually, as you listen to this, I'm driving to Western Tennessee to speak this weekend at a big tactical conference that I've been to many times and I've spoken at before, and I'm excited. And that trip is the trip. It's about a 6-hour drive that I really thought about and conceived of what is Barbell Logic online coaching at this point now, nearly 10 years ago. And so I had developed this online coaching method by myself. I knew that I couldn't scale it forever by myself. I knew that I needed a team. What would that process look like? And I actually got to the point where I pulled over at a gas station at some point, got gas, pulled my laptop out, put it in the passenger seat. I've told this story before, and drove down the road. Would not suggest, but I just kind of typed with one hand and not really, and there's tons of typos in it, but just enough to make bullet points on my laptop so that when I got to the place I was going, I came in, I said hi to the people that were my friends and that I loved. And then I said, hey, I need to take a couple hours and just like flesh this out. So I fleshed it out. And that was essentially the raw, rough draft business plan of what is now Barbell Logic Online Coaching. And so these long drives are great. And by the way, these are also great times that if you don't have something dedicated to think about, it's another great time to listen to an audiobook or a podcast. And I'm certainly not like, there are podcasts that are just entertaining. And I've listened to those, I've listened to like Serial and, murder mysteries and stuff like that, but that doesn't help me think. I have certain podcasts like Founders Podcast and All In Podcast. By the way, shout out, All In Podcast has completely changed our business over the past 3 or 4 years. If you're a business owner, it is the best podcast in business. And all 4 Mission Control are going to go out to LA in September. And we get to meet the quote unquote besties, if you know who I'm talking about in the All In podcast. And I mean, we're going to get to hear, probably they haven't released the speakers, but it's people like Elon Musk and Ray Dalio and Mark Cuban. I mean, just like massive people in the industry. And so I'm super excited for that and the networking that will occur. When I listen to those podcasts, I will have to pause the podcast to make notes because it brings something up in me. So if I don't have something that I'm really focused on, like, hey, I need to think about this thing, I'll often listen to that or an audiobook. I love documentaries. And that's not to say that I don't watch stuff for fun, because I do. I mean, Rachel and I are watching a murder mystery right now on Netflix. We usually have a TV show that we're watching. I love, my favorite show, shout out Jesse Meekum, is Alone. I love Alone. And Alone is what I think about when I wake up at 1 a.m. and can't sleep. I pretend I'm in a little cave or a little log cabin shanty, tiny little thing, and it's freezing cold. I'm in the Canadian Rockies and I'm like, okay, go back to sleep. This is where you are. That's what I do. So I do the things that are still for kind of entertainment and relaxation, which I also would argue that if those are not overdone, those are important things and not the non-urgent, non-important. But most of the content I consume, it's the Modern Wisdom podcast with Chris Willix, and it's All In, and it's Founders, and it's all of those sorts of things, as well as, documentaries and audiobooks and things like that, that just, I'm listening to them to get ideas, to then often pause. I often listen to them for some period of time, 30 minutes, half an hour, whatever, pause, and then I make a whole bunch of notes based on what I'm listening to. And so walks are my favorite. Sauna is great, but you're kind of suffering, so it's a little bit more difficult. Driving is wonderful, both for thinking. There's times where I just literally turn everything off and I just drive, especially if it's highway driving, and I just think. And the other one I really like is manual labor, which I don't do a ton of, but when I go out and work, I mean, I still have a pretty big yard. We have people that mow our yard, but like this week, actually on July 4th, last week, we needed to do some, clean up of the bushes and the trees and kind of the weeds that were going around the garden. And it doesn't take hardly any mental effort. It's a physical effort. And there's something about a combination of at least a light physical effort. You're not doing full on, you're not doing Fran, where you can't think about anything but not dying. You're out there pulling weeds in the garden, or you're weeding around something. And I'm often, as I do those things, which require virtually no mental thought, I can just focus on the manual labor, do the manual labor, and think about the things that I want to think about and let my mind just go. And for somebody like me who's extremely analytical, very logical, and doesn't have a lot of creativity, and I've talked about this before too, the concept of like creating a symphony out of nothing, or just, I just can't, my brain just doesn't work that way. It's why Brett McKay, probably 10 years ago, started to convince me to read fiction books occasionally. And so I love getting into a fiction book every once in a while, because it lets your mind go if you're a guy like me or a person like me who is so analytical and so systematic in their thought, so logical in their thought, that they don't allow themselves to go to a fictional place. And so it allows me to go there as well. But the key there is to find those places that require very little thought, even places like the grocery store, which I don't go to very often because we mostly have groceries delivered, but get a nice grocery store up the road. Occasionally I'm going up and picking up a few things for dinner tonight, like some fresh vegetables and, cilantro or, things like that. I throw in the earbuds because the Apple thing doesn't fit my ear, and I listen and I make notes. And because I'm doing a thing that doesn't require a lot of mental effort, and so I can give the mental effort to the thinking while doing the physical thing that requires virtually no thinking. This is the key. So as you think about your week, you look at your calendar, you look at your timeline, you do a time audit, and you say like, okay, in these places, you can't do that as a coach. If you're training somebody in person, you can't, you have to kind of be all in. You're either coaching the set or you're interacting with the person. You can't think, right? If you wake up in the morning and you have 5 or 6 urgent things to do, you can't think because the urgent things are bearing down on you. You've got to get through the urgent things. If you're groggy, if you're sleepy, and for me, it's late at night, there's no chance I can think about this stuff. And I know not everybody is like me. I can literally feel my IQ drop later at night as I get tired. And again, if I'm getting up at 2 or 3:30 in the morning, and it's now 8 o'clock at night, there is no good thinking that is occurring. And so the key is you're refreshed, you're well slept, There's no urgency hanging over you. And you're doing a thing that doesn't require mental effort, but still probably needs to be done. I'm down working at the cabin, I'm doing a project, I'm just cutting wood or doing whatever, then those are great times to think. And so I would challenge you as the action item this week to just, if nothing else, to lay out 4 or 5 places in your life, things that you do, whether that's a drive, a commute, mowing the lawn, which you should not be doing, but whatever that is, like housework, cleaning the kitchen, just whatever those things are that require no mental effort, but just physical effort, those are great times to think. And so it can either, and of course, walking is, I still think, is the greatest way to do that. Walking's the perfect example because your heart rate is, when you start the walk, your heart rate is at whatever, 70, 75, 80, and your heart rate gets up to like 120, somewhere in that ballpark, 115 to 125, let's say. And that's just enough and perfect kind of level 2 blood flow to really get the blood flow to your brain and get your brain thinking well. Often when I go on these walks, and I know Nikki is the same, there's not like a set end point. I'm just walking, like maybe it's a mile, maybe it's 5 miles. It just depends on how good the thinking is. And when I get in that zone of like, oh man, I'm really fleshing some stuff out here, you just keep walking, or you just keep doing the thing, or you just keep driving and carefully making notes without any car accidents or pulling over at gas stations every once in a while and making notes so that you don't have to hold that stuff in your head as bandwidth. And thinking's incredible. And then what I've found, vacation is the other one, that even to a point where vacation for me, I do so little, I just do only the smallest of the urgent work, or the urgent work that absolutely has to be done. I spend all the rest of my time on vacation thinking about, sitting out on the beach, that's kind of the vacations that we take, and just thinking about things, making notes on the beach. Don't flesh them out on the beach. It's sunny. You can't see your phone very well. Just making some bullet points, and then coming back and having some time, back in the condo or whatever, to flesh that out. And then I often come back from vacation with kind of refreshed ideas. I am refreshed and ready to go. I'm like, okay, let's hit the ground running. I needed the vacation. Now I've had the vacation and I'm in a good place. And so thinking is really important. It's very rarely urgent. So it falls in that quadrant, that most important quadrant that is similar to time with family, faith, fitness, etc. Like those things, like the big picture business. If you are a C-suite sort of, CEO or COO or whatever, there are times that I think it's very necessary. Or even if you're just a parent, you're married, you want to think about like, how's my relationship with my wife? How's my relationship with my kids? What are the things I need to teach my kids and prepare my kids to live a life on their own that we haven't tackled? These are great times to think about those things. So like walking, sauna, grocery shopping, driving, vacation, manual labor, all those times are great. So you probably can think of another 3 or 4. I'd love to hear back from you if you want to reach out. I'm easy to find on barbellogic.com. You can shoot me an email. I'd love to hear, when are the times that you get your best thinking done, and make it a priority, right? Like put a little urgency on thinking, like just create the space in your calendar to give yourself time to think, whether that's early in the morning, you wake up, have the coffee, get through some of the urgent stuff, and then go on a walk. You get to think, and you'll be amazed at what you'll come up with that then you can put into action after the brainstorming session. But what we found is that if we just try to put into action without the brainstorming session, there are many broken pieces, and you want all cylinders firing. All cylinders don't fire unless you've really thought through the process and thought through the important stuff. So there's a lot of importance in thinking. People don't do it enough. We spend way too much time, like when we're in our dead zones, a lot of times in those things, we just entertain ourselves with entertaining podcasts or watching TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever the thing is. And those are phenomenal opportunities to think about the things that matter. There you go. There's another episode of the Barbell Logic Podcast Coaching Success Series. Hope you guys have a great weekend. I'm excited to talk to my tactical response alumni this weekend, to talk to Nate Garrison. I had some really nice messages on social media this week. Nate's my buddy that has the J pouch, the kind of colostomy bag, and he's super strong and he walks the walk and talks the talk. And he's going to be talking to YNAB down there, which is really cool as well. And talking about, I think both of us are going to be talking a 30,000 foot view of like why you need to have a good handle on your finances and why you need to be strong. And without getting too much into the trenches, it's really more about convincing people the need of doing these things and hopefully give them some things to think about as they go back home at the end of the weekend. So hope you have a great weekend. Hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next Friday.